Hi and welcome everyone to the Micro Frontends Meetup for October. I hope you're all doing great and that you're having a great time. If you're joining for the first time, well, welcome. We will go over all the logistics in a moment, but for now, just feel encouraged to participate in the chat and ask your questions. Feel free to, of course, come up with some good topics for the next episodes and also engage with all the other members in the chat. So, first remark that I want to send out is that this session is being recorded and we will also make the recording being available on YouTube. As a matter of fact, potentially the URL where you're watching it right now on YouTube will remain the same, so we will not remove it, and it will be, of course, also findable via the search. Also, the URL is present on our website, meetup.microfrontends.cloud. So yeah, make sure to check out also all the previous meetups that we had. As already mentioned, we would appreciate any activity in the chat. So if you have any question or just want to point out things, then please do so. But if you engage in the chat, just a reminder, it never happened. I guess it will never happen, but it's still good to remind you that we have a code of conduct, so please follow it. In short, just remain professional and polite. Don't harass anyone or go out of bounds. So we appreciate, of course, your cooperation here. If you have a good story to tell, if you want to be as a guest on the show, so we do sometimes the Micro Frontends Meetup also with one or more guests, then just submit your proposal. We have a call for papers page hosted at sessionwise.com. So the link is on the bottom of the screen. You can also find the link on the microfrontends.cloud website. So meetup.microfrontends.cloud is the website of the meetup, and there's also the call for papers linked. You can also write me on LinkedIn if you prefer that, and then we of course can have an exchange, but any kind of experience that you have there, anything you want to share, if you're also welcome. You don't need to be a guest for the full hour, of course. If you say, I only got a little bit, and that is quite less, that's also not a problem. Sharing is caring, so we would appreciate anyone who, of course, wants to share their experiences with the community. Finally, some advertisement. Well, the workshops are cleared, of course, for this year. So now we are only doing individual company workshops. And while this might still be a good advertisement, I thought let's change it, let's swap it up a bit. For this episode, we say if you're interested in testing out a microphone discovery service, what it would mean for you, then you can always access the one that we have commercially available at www.viral.cloud. And using the QR code in the top right corner, you can also just submit your data and get access to a free trial of the discovery service. So that comes in form, for instance, of a Docker image that you can then run on-premise or whatever cloud installation that you have. That being said, I would say let's jump right into the topic and let's get into today's session. So for today, we have quite a nice thing to cover. Let me bring over the browser window. What we will do is that we will discuss how to create a portal application. And this should be, of course, not just some portal, but a portal that is really scalable. So composed of micro frontends that can be, of course, shipped from different teams, but more importantly, of course, shipped with a really fast time to market, so that you can really focus on individual functionality that you want to bring into this portal. We have a demo online, and I will show you how that looks, let's say, in code form, and we will develop and deploy a new microphone into this portal. It's hosted on the free tier of Microsoft Azure. So that means while it seems to be running rather smoothly right now, the free tier is always shutting down and, of course, only allows a certain number of CPU minutes per day. Therefore, keep in mind if you access the demo that it might take a rather long time before it's up and running. So if you don't see anything on the screen and it's just connecting, this means Azure is just breaking up the installation, and it takes a little bit of a while until it's up and running. But right now we have it here up and running. We are logged in with one of the users, Marie Lou. We can, of course, also log out, use another user like Leah here, and just go online. And this is a different user who also gets access to different set of functionality. So the dashboard here changed a bit. So there's now the grid power consumption, and there are some different, let's say, kind of components present. So the portal was, let's say, just revived with a different set of functionality. And now, of course, before we, let's say, just make the round in this demo and look around what we have in here, I would first go back into the code and see how this portal was in general design and what's the architecture behind it. And again, following up from the introduction, always feel free to ask your questions if you want to see something in here that I didn't show, or something's unclear that I said earlier of a remark. Always just feel free, and I will try to monitor, of course, the chat and look for your questions and try to answer them. All right, so before we continue here, let's look at the code. The code for the portal that you've seen is all stored in a single repository, a monorepo, but for the extra development we will do in this session, we'll use a completely different repository, just to make sure that we are following best practices, and that even though we could store some micro frontends in the monorepo, and we will see that here in a second, we don't need to do that, right? All right, so what we have is, from the code base perspective, we have two folders. One is called packages, and this contains the core packages. One is called API, so this is the backend for frontend that we ship together with the solution. Then we have the app folder here, so this is the single page application that we use for the portal, and all the core components that are used in here are stored in the components folder. And for the components, what we used, just to already point at that, is the components that can be, let's say, just developed directly by copy and paste from shadcn. So if you ever, let's say, used shadcn, this is exactly being included via shadcn. So the accordions, etc., they are, let's say, scaffolded via shadcn, but that means we, let's say, scaffolded our own component library here, and we can change everything that's in here. Now, the other aspect is that we have these micro frontends, they are pilots, so you can already guess the system that's running underneath the system where the application is, let's say, being built upon is called Pyrel, so that's the micro frontend framework, and all these pilots are the different micro frontends that we have at the moment. The advanced, so this is just advanced user settings, analytics, customers, grid, meetup, and product support. So just a variety of, let's say, functionality that's included here. So before we dive into the code of these pilots and packages, let's look at the architecture just in a second. So what we built here at the end is looking like this. So we have our single page application, and that communicates just with one set of endpoints coming from our gateway. So this is the code that we called API in here. And from this gateway on, real functionality may be, let's say, requested by going to some other APIs. So the gateway can be thought of as a kind of a reverse proxy. The next thing we have is that the gateway also does a little bit more. It also keeps track of the user session. So whenever we, let's say, have to log in, we do that right now via an integrated provider that is not really, let's say, connected to a database. It could be. It could also use some identity provider. That's an OAuth2 system, or something based on top of that, like OIDC compatible. But we are not doing anything like that here. We just have, let's say, local user accounts, and they are not actually validated against a database or something. So for this demo, we just have a fixed, let's say, set of users that are available. And the gateway here has kind of a session service in there, so it keeps track of the user sessions, and it knows then what users are currently logged in, and manages their session. It could then, of course, also use this information to make an exchange from the cookie, so the user session, to, for instance, a JWT to connect to other services as well. So quite powerful approach and quite flexible as well. In order to, let's say, get all the functionality into our single page application, we leverage the Micro Frontends discovery service. So we go from the single page application to the gateway, and the gateway makes the same thing as it would do for other services. It makes a request to the Micro Frontends discovery service. Now, this request might then be enriched with further information that is obtained by looking at the user account. So as an example, let's just look how that's done here in the code, because I think this is rather interesting. We have this function in the code called load pilots, and this function here does the fetch call to our feed service. So that's actually obtained via the feed URL of the constants module. And we enrich this request via some headers. So for instance, the user UID, so the user ID that we have associated with the session, that is actually attached as the x minus user minus ID header. And the same for the mail, role, and area of the user. There could be more information in here, but that's the most important things that we at the moment want to provide to the discovery service. And the main point for doing that is that the discovery service can now use this information to actually decide if a Micro Frontend should be rolled out or not, right? And the end result is what we see right here, right? So that this user here, Leah, gets the power grid consumption on the screen, and already has a different set of Micro Frontends than another user. And we can see that already in the network tab. So let's try to inspect that. Let me make this a little bit larger. Let me load it again. At least I hope it's still up and running, otherwise we will need to wait a little bit for it. As said, it's running on the Azure Free tier. And it can only take up to, let's say, 2 or 3 minutes to load. And if it's sleepy, let's say. But Azure should allocate the resources and then, of course, have it up and running, and hopefully will do so. In the meantime, I can monitor the chat, but so far I don't see any questions, so I will just continue there. And I love the waiting time. Oh, we have a 504 from Azure, so let's see. Love it. If it's not working, then I must be restarting it by hand, maybe. I love the Azure Free tier because it gives me a great option in the beginning, but it doesn't give me great performance. But you can't get everything in life, right? Alrighty, let me just restart it manually. It doesn't seem to come up. Alrighty. Okay, restarted, so it should come up in a second. I forced it now. Love the waiting game. But this is where you see that this shows live, right? No, that's the comment. This is great. I love it that it worked beforehand. It stopped working now. Whoever wants to make an advertisement for AWS can do it right now, maybe. But what could also work is stop and start. Nice. All right. No, it doesn't come up. Oh, I love this. Great, great, great. So maybe we should give it just a couple more minutes and continue in the code for the moment. Because this really seems just maybe a matter of time, but we shouldn't be out of minutes because I didn't look at it today for the 60 CPU minutes. Anyway, so while we will wait for it, let's just continue here. So at the end of the day, again, we ship these different headers, and now the discovery service, of course, can use it in order to decide if the respective microphone should be returned or not. All right. So the application itself, as mentioned, it's based on Pyro, but what we can see is it's not, let's say, requiring to use that information, because at the end of the day, everything that counts is in the app TSX, and it then decides only is it logged in or not, right? Do we ship the real portal, or are we just a guest and therefore see the login screen, for instance? That's all the information the portal does at the beginning. And then when we really want to go into this portal mode, right, we obtain some microphones, and the initial request found out that we are logged in, then we work against that. So using the microphones that we obtained in the initial request, we build up this instance here using the create instance call of the Pyro framework, and of course having already defined some of the pages, like for instance we have a dashboard page or a settings page, or we have a logout URL that leads them to the logout screen, which of course eventually runs the logout. So this is all that we do here, and all the respective domain functionality lies then in the micro frontends, right? So pretty straightforward. If you ever, let's say, touch Pyro, of course, we don't have enough time also to give an introduction to Pyro, but at the end of the day, rest assured, this is just more or less a standard React app, with the difference that we are using now Pyro component to have our router web in a distributed way, let's say. So we package everything together, and then what we can do, we run the microphones. Actually, and I hope that this should just work. So let's see. We can also just run the start command in here, and it will actually run everything that we have, which means it runs all the microphones now that are contained in the monorepo. It runs the API, so the backend for frontend, and it also runs the application, of course. So a change to any of these things will just reload the specific area that was changed, and we can then just access it. So we can have a look. And let's see. This might still take a little bit of a while. In the meantime, let's just wait here. So let me see. We got these things. This is all looking good, but we are still building. So give another minute and I'll check Azure in the meantime. Yeah, I hope that it is back. So maybe let's give it another try while we wait. So this now looks good, at least something that it now came back up. And what we have in here is the initial response returns two things. So one is the user. That's how we find out if we should go into the portal mode or if we remain in the guest mode. And the micro frontends, of course, that should be integrated if we are in the portal mode. So when we log out, we see that we are not logged in, there's no user, and we don't get any micro frontends. So logging in again, and therefore taking that into contrast, right? We got advanced with 4 micro frontends, but advanced with meter and plant. And if we go to Mary Lou, then we see that we got also 4 microphones, but these are different. So for instance, we got support here, which has, for instance, the speech bubble and has an entry here in the menu called support. And you see, because we now have the analytics microphone, we didn't have that before, and we now have a lot more possibilities on our dashboard. And so this is how already the UI composes dynamically, quite nicely in my opinion. And the reason is that we can ship these pieces of information to the discovery service. All right. Let's see how we're doing locally. Great. So we now started the system locally as well. And you can even now try out certain things. So for instance, you could, just to see that the API dynamically loads, right? You could use a user foo@bar.com with some password pass. And if I try to log in, it's invalid, right? Doesn't exist. And the easiest way out is just to go in here. And as I mentioned, this is just, let's say, a constant. So all the users are in this table. All we would need to do is introduce a new user. And we are done. foo@bar.com. This is the foobar. And our password should remain pass. The rest is not so interesting right now. Maybe let's give this user a unique ID. And that's it. So now we should be able to, let's say, log in. And we can just access now the application, and we are foobar, who's now inside the application, right, as foobar. So far, so good. So locally, we can run this, we can play around with it. All the micro frontends are there. We can now play around with the micro frontends, and this is rather nice development experience. But of course, as mentioned, I mean, this is let's say the core part of the portal. And usually there shouldn't be so many micro frontends, if any, in there. So the most time in development will certainly not be spent on this thing, right? It's, of course, where the whole orchestration is defined, where, let's say, the core components are defined, and where, in this case at least, the core micro frontends are defined, but it's not where, let's say, all the rest of the development will be spent. And therefore, yes, while it's quite nice to look at this and have the power to just develop everything locally, it is, and in one repository, it is much better to distribute that already and use different repositories. And this is also what we can do and what I want to show next before we move on. But before we can do that, let's first do also one more thing. Let's look back at the architecture diagram. And let me also close this. We don't need it. So what we've seen here is Yes, we have the single page application, it goes to the gateway, and we have this box marked here. So this box is essentially, let's say, a Docker container that we ship at the end of the day. There are multiple ways how you ship it. You could also ship this in two parts, where you place, I don't know, the single page application, a static storage, and you just place your API somewhere else. But the beauty, of course, of shipping everything in one Docker image is that you can really define what else should be in there. For instance, this Micro Frontends discovery service, we could, let's say, have our commercial license, run it as a Docker image, and therefore have it also part of this Docker image in a Docker Compose setup, which is, in my opinion, quite nice. Plus, you can place in other things and therefore have really fine control over how your, let's say, server looks like at the end of the day. So one of the things that we, for instance, introduced in the Docker image is that we don't only have, let's say, the release artifacts of the application, but together with the single page application, we also have the so-called emulator definition in here. So what is this and how does it help us? Let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's place it here on the side, maybe, or maybe on this side. Actually, it doesn't really matter. And the thing is that this is just, let's say, a set of assets, which are pretty much the same assets that we also would ship in the single page application. However, they are non-minified and they also come definitely with source maps and everything, right? So that they are more developer friendly, let's call it, and less production friendly. Plus, we ship a special kind of a JSON called an emulator JSON, and that can help us to then create more micro frontends for this dedicated portal application. So how does this look like in practice? We have the same URL, you can see it here hopefully, and then we place in a subpath def all the assets for this emulator package. And here we got the emulator JSON that I was referring beforehand. So this is the file we're currently looking at, and you can see that it contains a couple of the meta information that you would expect also in a package JSON, like a name or a version. But then it also has a couple more pieces like scaffolding information that we see here, or the files section is much different than a package JSON. In addition, we have things like dependencies, but a little bit differently structured than a package JSON. We have optional and included. And then we have also an import map, which defines how the imports are essentially treated. All right, and the big question is, of course, what is this useful for? Because yeah, now we have such a emulator JSON, but what's the purpose of this file? And the purpose is to help us create new micro frontends already tailored for this portal, plus of course with the development of the portal already locally available. So how does this look like and how does this feel? Let me open another window here. And I already created an empty folder called MF Meetup demo. So now what I can run is a command npm init pilot, and I will actually supply a couple of parameters to it. I will supply a source, and if you look at the source, you find it's def emulator JSON. So this is essentially pointing to the emulator manifest that we've just seen. And then you have the bundler ES built, and we just also say defaults, meaning that otherwise for everything that I didn't specify, take the default steps, right? All right, I now run this. I installed the create pilot package in this latest version, and now it's doing all the steps that have been outlined in the manifest. So if I'm lucky, and I say that now because before I wasn't lucky with the Azure freeze there on the service, but if I'm lucky and this doesn't take too long, then we should have something, let's say, available. And we're getting already some sources. It's installing some dependencies. And now, this looks quite good. We already got some code here, right? So we got a page. This is our page, TSX, and we got a package JSON and everything, right? And the most important part, it also installed the dependencies. I can now just run npm start. And essentially, that's it. It's running, and I should be now capable of accessing localhost 1234 again. And here I am. I can log in. And voila, I'm in the portal. But as you can see, it's now empty because this is not the full portal. This is just the bare portal without any micro frontend except the one that I was writing. So what can I now do with this, right? I can now, of course, write some code. And for this, I will try to go in a kind of a split screen way. So let me do this. Now with this, like the window management on macOS, so therefore bear with me here. All right, so what we did here so far is we introduced a page, but we can do a little bit more. For instance, we could introduce a side menu. That sounds good. And we need to provide a path. What should we do? We already have /page, so let's also use /page. And then we need to provide an icon. Oh, what can we do here? Well, the good thing is that I already installed together with the package, the Lucid React. So together with the app shell, the Lucid React package. And this allows me to have, I don't know, all kinds of different icons. So let me just pick something. I don't know. I'm angry. I don't know how this icon looks like, but let's just have a look when I introduce it. So that must be a node. So that's a node now. And then we need to give it a name, example page. Okay, let me save it. And now we got this angry icon here. This is good. And I can already click on it. And I see this is maybe strangely aligned, but we come to that in a second. Right now, you might have spotted that there are no breadcrumbs. So the breadcrumbs are part of, let's say, some overall design. And they're also computed from the app shell. So there's an API to actually determine these breadcrumbs. So what we could say is, hey, for /path, we actually are below /. We could also give it a different parent. And let's give it a title, example page. So this could also be localized and whatnot, but for now, this is what we did. And now we also have breadcrumbs, and they are already working. And we are building up our application, in my opinion, quite nicely. All right, so next thing is, let's come to this page. And the first thing is, well, yes, it's defined in here, and we see, oh, there is some title, but it's not going, let's say, in the direction that we want. So what we might want is to introduce a little bit of CSS to have this correctly introduced. And we are using Tailwind here. And this is another thing, we always need to look at the documentation, but I think I can do something like this, right? And yeah, so it's now a little bit better. I wouldn't say perfect, but maybe good enough for us. So a little bit of gaps in between, everything flexbox, and it's in the direction of a column. So it goes from top to bottom, not from left to right. That would be row. All right. Okay, maybe this is already everything that we wanted, but potentially not, right? So, I mean, this is just some lorem ipsum, and there are now various ways you can think about it. First is, well, you just need to implement now everything that you want in your micro frontend and have all the, let's say, UI elements that you need. Or you already, let's say, want to get a little bit ahead and say, I don't need to start from zero. I can just take, for instance, something that can be scaffolded with a use case in mind. And this is where we come to an AI enhanced development. So there is, of course, a reason why in this, let's say, portal, we are using the shadcn components. And the reason is quite simple. These components are directly wired up with a tool that's called V0 and is, let's say, made available by Vercel. The nice thing about this tool is that it's a generative AI, so an LLM that essentially understands, of course, that it needs to write React components as an outcome. And the component doesn't just do something, let's say, out of vacuum, but it stands on top of shadcn. So it will already reference pre-made components, and these pre-made components are the shadcn components. So we then only need to, let's say, redirect from the standard paths to our components, and that's it. But we can, the interface is exactly the same, and so there is not much work needed to be done. So the big question is, as usual, and I have no idea, maybe someone can write something in the chat, what should we do? What should we bring into existence right now? What should our page contain? If there is no suggestion within the, let's say, the next 15 seconds, I will just come up with an example prompt, and I guess I will make it something on a feedback form maybe, but maybe we got something that we can use. And so I'm not seeing anything. I will just now type in. Make me a simple feedback form, and let's maybe not do it too simple. Rated from 1 to 5 stars. If the rating is below 3, then additional information should be provided by the user. This additional information has to be optional, but well shown. I don't know, but suggested to enter. I don't know. So I don't want to, let's say, make the best prompt here, but rather something that, you know, gives the tool here enough information to create me something, and it now starts to work on that and gives me already something hopefully usable. Let's see how it looks. Okay, that looks nice. I think the preview is also functional in that sense that, yeah, we can press 5, 4, 3, and now we get that. I would say that's quite nice, right? So that, in my opinion, yeah, I mean, that is a good starting point. Of course, it hasn't figured out where to send this, etc. That's now not the subject that we care about. What we really care about is having the core logic being taken away from us. So I will now just paste this. And we don't want to have this exported directly. What I want to do is just make it a component. We actually remove this. And the big question is now, where are these components exported from? So that's coming from our customer portal demo, is it? No. What's the name here? Sorry, I need to look it up. We have the name customer portal app. Okay. All right. So TypeScript doesn't tell me that it's there because it only looks up what's in the dependencies. So this thing is not a real npm package or so it doesn't see it. But let me just do this, and I think this looks okay-ish. Now the next thing is that maybe instead of this whole thing, I just say feedback form. Let's roll and let's hope for the best. But that looks rather okay-ish. Let's see. It doesn't show the yellow marks right now. But it's already working to the sense that when I click it, something's happening. It doesn't show yellow marks. So let's see what's the problem here. I guess this is a problem with that I didn't configure ESBuild here to, let's say, build Tailwind. So this class, the text yellow 400, is not available yet. So we would need to extend ESBuild to actually respect and have, let's say, post CSS included. And therefore, of course, have the text yellow 400 class in there. But yeah, for now, we also don't need to, let's say, do it like this. We can also just import the style and for the moment work around it by just including some CSS and defining that on our own. So we don't need the link class here. Let's see. So what was the missing class? We got the text yellow 400 and the fill yellow, and then we also got some text gray 300. So let's see. We got this. We want to define it. And that again, if I would have more time, I would maybe set that up or use the same setup that we use in the main repository, which uses Vite and not ESBuild. But yeah, for now, we can just go ahead and include something. I could look that up, what the 300 is, but for now, we don't care here. Let's maybe just go for a standard yellow, the yellow 400. And for the fill, I'm actually not sure if it wants to use the color, but it should give us enough, hopefully, to okay, so the fill was definitely not good. I guess it is really just fill then. And this is an SVG color, but we will find out in a second. So let's see. It looks better. The yellow doesn't look so good, but I think it's going in the right direction. But you get the idea here, right? So this is quite nice, and we're able to define that in a rather short amount of time. What we might not want is that this thing expands, but for this we could just limit the outer diff and not have the flex call defined like that. Maybe have it as a flex swan that it's itself always takes up the whole space, right? That way, at least being consistent. But those are then the details you will anyway always look in your application. But I would say this is already giving us much more than we would have anticipated in this setup. Right, so quite nice, and of course, now that we have this, and again, this thing is not wired up to anything. So if we now press, it's great. But maybe not terrible, not great either. Something like this. So we can submit it and we just get the alert and it resets. So again, the real submission is missing here. But the next aspect, of course, that we could now look at is, okay, we got this feedback form. It has the angry button here. It goes to page. Maybe change this and make this a little bit more, let's say, robust. So what I would suggest is that we introduce a route here. And we call it maybe feedback. And also make it global. Doesn't really matter. So it could be like a constant. And then we just use this. Okay. Format the document, save it. Now this page doesn't exist anymore because it's called feedback. And instead of example page, we call it feedback, of course. Give feedback. All right, so this should also look nice in a responsive design. Let's look at that in a second, but for now we see our feedback is here and we get the feedback form and everything is looking awesome. But, and I hope that this thing didn't fall asleep yet again. Let's reset this, this, and this is still active, but we don't see it here on the live page, right? So now the next step is how can we get our local development up to the production server? And for this, right, is a rather simple process. We would introduce a new command. Let me call this deploy. And this deploy command just uses the piracy CLI. So we can use pilot publish. We would make a fresh build. Then we need a URL and we would need an RPE key, but we don't have one right now, or we just say we need to log in and then do it like this. So the only thing that's left to determine is how do we get this URL? And yeah, somebody needs to tell you, but we already know it because, as you know, we already developed beforehand the portal, and in the portal we are already using this. So for instance, all the other micro frontends, they have this URL already known. So if you look, for instance, sorry, in here, then you see that we got here the URL. So that's the only piece of information we now need to know for this task. So once we know where to deploy, all we can need to do is place the URL here, stop this, place it here, and now hopefully the demo got with me and I didn't, let's say, misspell something. We enter it. Okay, so I think we are in a good way, but let me also show this in the browser. So where are we? Here. So this is the URL we just got. So it's also down there. And I already have logged in. So I just opened this in a tab where I'm logged in. And now it continued, it uploaded this. And this is now also available for everyone, meaning if it really fully worked, let's see. We now can run this, and our form is here, right? And how would you rate your experience? You can say, okay, that's fine. Submit it, and this way you see already that this thing is functional as it should be and already made available, right? So quite nice. We were able to develop something, use V0 Dev to get a head start via AI, and at the end of the day, of course, ship it just essentially directly. But of course, in a real productive setup, you would rather do this via your CI/CD pipeline. It would run this command. It would not use interactive. It would rather use an API key that you stored in a secure vault, for instance. And this way, you now have something up and running where you can, whenever you want, to make the improvements and suggestions that you need to. So a quite nice setup that really helps you scale up any kind of portal development that you want to do up to the point where really you can now develop all these modules independently. And also to just show you this one point, let me bring this over here. I hope I can do that. Yeah, maybe that's on the split screen endeavor right now. So this is the portal that we see. the Micro Frontends Discovery Service, having showing all the modules that we see in the portal, and we see here the MF Meetup demo Micro Frontend that we just uploaded, and that's just available now in version 1.0.0. And as a next step, of course, what we might want to do is that we say, hey, this thing doesn't really fit in for whatever reason. We don't think that this is good or what we want. So you can always just stop it and say, let's disable it. And whenever we disable that, this is no longer available. So now we just also removed it from the UI, and no user will see this ever. But on the other side, I mean, what we can also do, this would be the last step, is to say we use certain rules behind it. So what we can say is add a new rule, make this maybe by a certain filter, but what we are now after is only for, and for this, of course, we now would need to know the accounts, but let's say only for Leah. So maybe Leah should just test out this feature, whatever, but what we can say, type is header. The name of the header is x minus user minus mail, I think, and it must be Leah Loof at test.com. So only Leah should have access to this. And hopefully I didn't mistype, but that's a nice thing. We can just try out, find out. So Maria here doesn't get it. And maybe let me open that in a different container. So we use now Leah. And when she logs in, she sees now that the feedback form is available. And she can, of course, use it as well. But other users don't have that available. So now we already made the application, the portal, a little bit more dynamic. This is, of course, a rather, let's say, dramatic thing that you're restricted to a single user. Usually you would restrict it to a user group or based on some other characteristics. But you can do that, and this way, of course, you can, well, roll out your features as you like to. There are more options that you can use. The important aspect, again, is that you have in your architecture a piece like a discovery service, because now you're decoupled, and that makes independent deployments really easy, plus, of course, management independent of your code base. So now, yeah, our application behaves rather nicely, and we have a portal that is already up and running and ready to take the next step. Cool. So we are already reaching the end of the hour, and this, of course, gives you the chance to maybe ask more questions if there are any. Otherwise, I would conclude the session. So if you want to see something in more detail, then just yeah, tell me. Otherwise, I mean, always jump on our Discord and ask questions there. Check out the Micro Frontends Discovery Service. This is independent if you're using Pyro, Module Federation, Native Federation, or some other system, a great thing. There will be also articles coming out, how you can, for instance, make an Express.js server pluggable. So that will be released tomorrow. And that also will use the Discovery Service, because this goes beyond Micro Frontends. Of course, it can help you load modules of any kind, mostly, of course, these days JavaScript modules, but they can also be WebAssembly based or .NET DLLs, or maybe some other things. So you can essentially upload anything, and this thing just aggregates it for you, formats it nicely for you, and allows you to access it also with conditional rules the way you want it and need it to. All right, cool. Since I don't see any question, I would say let's call it a day. Thanks everyone for attending, and we see each other then in November again. Make sure to write me on LinkedIn if you have a suggestion for the show, or if you want to, let's say, yeah, share your experience using Micro Frontends, building a Micro Frontends solution. It's always cool to discuss that. And otherwise, we still have the November and the December session this year. And then next year, we'll see. Usually, we always just start after the Micro Frontends conference mid of the year, but maybe we make this a more common thing. Also, if you have any thoughts on that topic, always just let me know regarding format, frequency of the Micro Frontends meetup, and topics, of course, that we select. And with that, I wish you all great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may roam, and see you in November then. Have fun and goodbye.